The first time I met Julian Carter, he didn't look at me just through me, like I was a smudge on his polished glass office door. I stood in his Manhattan penthouse suite, clutching my worn sketchbook, while he paced, phone glued to his ear, barking orders at someone who probably regretted existing. "You're late," he said without glancing up, as if my entire life should orbit his schedule. I was there because of a Craigslist ad, personal assistant needed for unconventional role. Discretion required. $5,000/week. I'm not proud of answering it, but rent in Brooklyn doesn't pay itself, and my art wasn't exactly selling at MoMA. Julian, all sharp jawline and sharper attitude, finally looked at me, his green eyes slicing through my thrift store jacket. "Elliot Hayes," he said, reading my name off a file like it was a court summons. "You're an artist. Broke, I assume." I bristled. "I get by." He smirked, leaning against his desk, a skyscraper of a man in a suit that probably cost more than my apartment. "Here's the deal, Elliot. I need you to play a part. My family's breathing down my neck to settle down, and I don't have time for their nonsense. You'll pretend to be my boyfriend for 3 months. Public appearances, family dinners, the works. You do this, you walk away with 15 grand. You in?" What would you do with that kind of money staring you in the face? Could you say no to a man like Julian, whose every word felt like a dare? I nodded, ignoring the twist in my gut, and just like that, I stepped into a lie that would unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. The next week was a crash course in Julian Carter's world. He was a rising star at Pearson Thorne, a law firm that handled billionaires and their secrets. At 32, he was already a legend for winning impossible cases, but his colleagues whispered about his coldness, his refusal to let anyone close. I learned fast that Julian didn't just play the part of an arrogant lawyer, lived it. Every morning, he'd text me a schedule, gala at 7. Wear the suit I sent. Don't talk about art. The suit arrived at my apartment, perfectly tailored, with a note, "Burn your old clothes." Our first public appearance was a fundraiser at the Met. I stood beside him, awkward in my new shoes, while he charmed donors with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Elliot, darling," he said, loud enough for the crowd, his hand brushing my lower back. The touch was electric, calculated, and I hated how it made my pulse race. I reminded myself, this is a job. He's paying you to fake it. But when he leaned in, whispering, "Smile. You look like you're at a funeral," I caught a flicker of something in his gaze: amusement. Curiosity. It was gone before I could name it. What does it mean to play a role so well you start to lose yourself in it? How do you keep your heart in check when someone's touch feels too real? I didn't know then, but I was about to find out. At his family's estate in the Hamptons, the stakes got higher. His mother, Evelyn, was a steel magnolia with a smile that could cut glass. "Julian's never brought anyone home," she said, her eyes dissecting me over a glass of Chardonnay. His father, Richard, a retired judge, grilled me about my career. I mumbled something about freelance illustration, and Julian swooped in, spinning a story about how we met at an art gallery. "Elliot's work is unique," he said, his tone dripping with just enough charm to sell it. I wanted to hate him for the lie, but his arm around my shoulder felt too steady, too right. That night, we shared a guest room part of the act. He insisted. "Don't get any ideas," he said, tossing me a pillow. But as we lay there, the moonlight spilling through the window, he asked, "Why do you draw? What's the point if it doesn't pay?" His voice was softer, almost human. I told him about the feeling of a pencil in my hand, the way a blank page could hold a whole world. He didn't respond, but I felt his eyes on me in the dark. What happens when a lie starts to feel like the truth? How do you pull back when you're already falling? I didn't have answers, but the way Julian's hand brushed mine as we left the estate the next morning told me he was asking the same questions. By the third week, the lines were blurring. We'd been seen at restaurants, photographed holding hands, and the gossip blogs were eating it up, Julian Carter's mystery boyfriend. I told myself it was just good acting as casual touches, the way he'd laugh at my bad jokes in front of cameras. But alone, in his car or his apartment, he was different. He'd ask about my sketches, my dreams, and I'd catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. One night, at a rooftop bar, he kissed me. It was for show, he said later, to shut up a nosy reporter. But the kiss hard, urgent, his hand gripping my jaw felt like a confession. My knees buckled, and when he pulled back, his eyes were stormy. Don't read into it, he muttered, but his voice cracked. I wanted to ask, what are we doing? Julian, why does this feel so real? But I didn't. I couldn't. What do you do when a kiss changes everything? How do you pretend when your heart is screaming the truth? I was in too deep. And Julian Carter, the man who never let anyone close, was starting to crack. The city lights blurred outside Julian's car as we drove back from the rooftop bar, the memory of his kiss burning on my lips. I stared out the window, trying to anchor myself in the neon glow of Times Square. But my mind kept replaying that moment, his hand on my face, the way he'd lingered just a second too long. It was for the cameras, he said again, his voice tight, but he hadn't looked at me since. Why do you need this? I asked, breaking the silence. The whole fake boyfriend thing. You could have anyone. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. My family wants stability. A partner makes me look reliable. It's good for the firm. His answer was too polished, like he'd rehearsed it. What do you hide when your life looks perfect on paper? What's so broken that you'd pay a stranger to play house? At his apartment, he poured whiskey and handed me a glass without asking. You're good at this, he said, sitting too close on the leather couch. The act. People believe you. His eyes searched mine, and I wondered if he was testing me or himself. I wanted to ask, are you pretending to, Julian? Or is there something real here? But I sipped the whiskey instead, letting it burn away the courage I didn't have. The next month was a whirlwind of events, charity balls, client dinners, even a weekend trip to his firm's retreat in upstate New York. We were the perfect couple to the outside world, Julian, the untouchable lawyer, and me, the quirky artist softening his edges. But every touch, every smile, felt like a tightrope walk. I'd catch myself wanting him, man, then I'd remember the contract, the money, the expiration date. One night, at the retreat, we sat by a bonfire, the other lawyers swapping stories about cases and conquests. Julian's arm was around me, his thumb tracing lazy circles on my shoulder. It was for show, I told myself, but when he laughed at something I said, really laughed, his eyes crinkling, I felt my chest tighten. Later, in our cabin, he didn't pull away when I sat next to him. You're not what I expected, he said, his voice low. Most people bore me. You don't. What does it mean when someone sees you, really sees you, but only in stolen moments? How do you hold on to something that's supposed to end? I didn't know, but I leaned closer, and for the first time, he didn't pull back. The next morning, reality crashed in. His ex, Marcus, showed up at the retreat, a lawyer from a rival firm, all charm and venom. So you're the new arm candy, Marcus said, his smile sharp as he shook my hand. Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't correct him. Later, I overheard them arguing in the lodge. You're faking it again, aren't you? Marcus hissed. You can't keep running from who you are. Julian's voice was ice. You don't know me anymore. What do you do when the past walks back into the present? How do you trust someone who's hiding from themselves? I wanted to confront Julian, to demand answers. But when he found me later, his eyes were raw, unguarded. Don't listen to him, he said, stepping close. He's wrong about me. But was he? I didn't know anymore. By the 5th week, the act was eating me alive. Every kiss, every whispered darling for the cameras, felt like a promise he'd never keep. We were at a gallery opening me world, not his, and he surprised me by asking about the paintings. Which one's yours? He said, scanning the walls. I pointed to a small canvas, a swirl of blues and grays inspired by the city's chaos. He stared at it, longer than I expected. It's lonely, he said finally, but beautiful. That night, he kissed me again, this time with no cameras, no audience. It was slow, deliberate, his hands framing my face like I was something precious. Elliot, he murmured, and my name in his voice broke something in me. I kissed him back, pouring every unspoken question into it. When we pulled apart, his eyes were wide, like he'd surprised himself. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said, but he didn't let go. What happens when the lines between pretense and truth disappear? How do you stop yourself from falling when you know it'll hurt? I was drowning in Julian Carter, and I didn't want to come up for air. The gallery kiss haunted me for days. Julian acted like it never happened, slipping back into his polished, untouchable self. But I caught the cracks, his lingering glances, the way his hand brushed mine when no one was watching. We were back in Manhattan, playing the perfect couple at a client dinner, when his phone buzzed. He excused himself, but not before I saw the name on the screen, Marcus. Why does the past always know when to strike? What do you do when the person you're falling for is still tethered to someone else? Back at his apartment, I couldn't hold it in. What's the deal with Marcus? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. Julian froze, his tie half untied, his expression unreadable. He's nobody, he said, but his eyes betrayed him. Nobody doesn't make you look like that. I pressed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. We were together for 2 years. It ended badly. That's all you need to know. But it wasn't. I wanted to know why Marcus still had power over him, why Julian's walls went up every time his name came up. If this is just a job, I said, why does it feel like more? He stared at me, and for a moment, I thought he'd confess something, anything. Instead, he turned away. You're reading too much into it, Elliot. Stick to the script. What do you do when someone shuts you out? How do you keep pretending when your heart is screaming for the truth? I didn't have answers, but I knew I couldn't walk away, not yet. The next week, Julian's mother invited us to a charity auction in Greenwich. You two are so convincing, Evelyn said, her smile tight as she adjusted my tie. Almost too perfect. Her words stung, a reminder that this was all a performance. But when Julian bid on a painting of vibrant abstract that reminded me of my own work, I felt a flicker of hope. For your studio, he said later, handing me the auction slip. You need better walls. His gesture threw me. Was it part of the act, or something real? That night, as we danced under chandeliers, his hand steady on my waist, I wanted to believe it was the latter. You're not so bad at this, he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. I laughed, but my chest ached. How do you dance with someone when every step feels like a risk? How do you trust a moment when it's built on a lie? The auction wasn't the only surprise. Marcus was there, watching us from across the room. When Julian excused himself to take a call, Marcus cornered me. He's using you, he said, his voice low and venomous. He'll break your heart, just like he broke mine. I wanted to argue, to defend Julian, but doubt crept in. What if Marcus was right? What if I was just another pawn in Julian's game? Back in the city, I tried to focus on my art, sketching late into the night to drown out the questions. Julian noticed. "You're distracted," he said one evening, standing in my cramped apartment, looking out of place in his pristine suit. "What's wrong?" I wanted to tell him everything, how his kiss had undone me, how Marcus's words had poisoned my thoughts. Instead, I showed him my latest sketch, two figures, blurred together, caught in a storm of color. "It's us," I said quietly, "or what I wish we could be." He stared at the drawing, his jaw tight. "You're too good for this, Elliot," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You deserve something real." He left before I could respond, and I stood there, holding the sketch, wondering if he'd just admitted he felt it too, or if he was warning me to let go. What do you do when the truth is too scary to face? How do you keep going when every step pulls you closer to heartbreak? I didn't know, but I couldn't stop now, not when Julian's walls were finally starting to crumble. Julian's words echoed in my head for days. You deserve something real. But what was real anymore? Every smile we shared in public, every quiet moment in his apartment, felt like a tightrope stretched over a chasm. I wanted to ask him, "What do you want, Julian? Are you pretending with me, or with yourself?" But every time I got close, he'd pull back, his arrogance a shield I couldn't pierce. We were at a rooftop gala when the tension broke. The city sparkled below, but all I could see was Julian, laughing with a senator, his charm effortless. I stood by the bar, sketching the crowd on a napkin, when Marcus appeared again. "You're still here," he said, his tone mocking. "He's good at keeping people on the hook." I snapped, tired of his games. "What do you want, Marcus? To ruin him? Or me?" He leaned closer, his voice a hiss. "I want you to see him for what he is. He'll never love you. He can't." His words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. When Julian found us, his eyes darkened. "Get away from him," he told Marcus, his voice low and dangerous. Marcus smirked but left, and Julian turned to me. "What did he say?" I shook my head, but my silence said enough. How do you trust someone when doubt is all you have? How do you love someone who might not know how? The next day, Julian took me to his office, a rare glimpse into his world without the act. "I need you to understand something," he said, showing me a case file pro bono work for a shelter serving queer youth. "This is why I do it. The money, the image, it's all for this." I saw a side of him I hadn't before, not the arrogant lawyer, but a man fighting for something bigger. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He shrugged, his smile bitter. "You think I'm heartless. Easier to let you." That night, we didn't pretend. We cooked dinner in his kitchen, laughing over burnt pasta. And when he kissed me, it wasn't for show. It was soft, searching, like he was asking permission. I kissed him back, my hands in his hair, and for once, the world felt right. But as we lay in his bed, his arms around me, I couldn't shake Marcus's words. What if this was just another act? What if Julian was too broken to love? The next morning, his mother called. "We're hosting a family dinner," she said. "Bring Elliot. It's time we really got to know him." Julian's face tightened, and I knew this wasn't just dinner, it was a test. What do you do when the stakes keep rising? How do you hold on to someone when the truth could tear you apart? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The dinner was a battlefield. Evelyn's questions were relentless. "What are your intentions with my son?" Richard's silence was worse, his eyes judging every word I said. Julian held my hand under the table, but his grip was too tight, like he was bracing for impact. When Evelyn asked about our future, I froze. Julian stepped in, spinning a story about shared dreams. but his voice was strained. Did he believe it? Or was it just another lie? After dessert, I escaped to the balcony, needing air. Julian followed. You okay? He asked, his voice soft. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth. But instead I asked, why do you keep people at arm's length? He looked away, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. Because it's safer, he said finally. But with you. I don't want to. What does it mean to let someone in? How do you trust when you're both scared? I took his hand, and for the first time, I felt like we were on the same side. The family dinner changed something. Julian was still guarded, but he stopped pulling away. We spent more time together outside the act quiet mornings in his apartment, late nights at my studio, where he'd watch me paint, asking questions that felt too personal for a contract. What scares you most? He asked one night, his voice barely above a whisper. I told him, losing myself in someone else's story. He didn't respond, but his hand found mine, and we sat in silence, the weight of the truth between us. What do you do when you're falling for someone who might not catch you? How do you keep going when the end is already written? I didn't know, but every moment with Julian felt like a brushstroke on a canvas I couldn't finish. The contract's end was looming, 2 weeks left. We were at a charity ball when Marcus struck again. He cornered me in a hallway, his eyes cold. You think you're special, he said. He'll drop you when the deal's done. I wanted to argue, but the deadline hung over me like a guillotine. When I told Julian, his face hardened. He's wrong, he said, but he didn't meet my eyes. You're not just this. His vagueness hurt more than Marcus's venom. What do you hold on to when trust feels like a gamble? How do you love someone who won't say the words? That night, Julian took me to Coney Island, a place I'd mentioned loving as a kid. We rode the Ferris wheel, the city glittering below, and he kissed me at the top, slow and deep. I don't want this to end, he said, his voice raw. I froze, my heart pounding. Then don't let it, I whispered. He didn't answer, but his arms tightened around me, and for a moment, I believed we could rewrite the script. The next day, reality hit. A gossip blog published a story, Julian Carter's fake romance exposed. Someone had leaked our contract, Marcus. I assumed. Julian's phone exploded with calls from his firm, his family. He paced his office, furious, while I stood there, feeling like the world was collapsing. This doesn't change anything, he said, but his voice was hollow. Doesn't it? I asked. He didn't answer. What do you do when the truth comes out? How do you fight for something that was never supposed to be real? I wanted to stay, to fix it, but Julian's silence was louder than any promise he'd made. The scandal hit like a storm. Julian's firm called an emergency meeting, and I wasn't invited. I sat in my apartment, scrolling through the headlines. Each one a knife, Carter's sham boyfriend. Lawyers lie exposed. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Stay low. I'll handle this. But how do you handle a lie when it's all anyone sees? How do you hold on to someone when the world is tearing you apart? I went to his office anyway, needing answers. He was alone, staring out at the skyline, his tie loosened. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I could have helped. He laughed, bitter. Help. This is my mess. Elliot. You were just part of it. The words stung, but his eyes were red, like he hadn't slept. Then why did you kiss me? I demanded. Why make me believe this was real? He stepped closer, his voice breaking. Because it is real. I didn't plan this. But you, he stopped, running a hand through his hair. You make me want things I can't have. What do you do when someone admits they love you but can't say it? How do you fight for a future that scares them more than you? We spent the next week in damage control. Julian's firm wanted him to issue a statement, to deny everything. But he refused. I'm done lying, he told me, his voice steady for the first time. We met with his parents, who were furious but softened when Julian took my hand. This started as a deal, he told them, but it's not anymore. Evelyn's eyes widened, but she didn't argue. Richard just nodded, like he'd seen it coming. What does it mean to choose someone over everything else? How do you rebuild when the foundation was a lie? I didn't know, but Julian's hand in mine felt like a start. We went public, not as a fake couple, but as something real. The cameras followed us, but this time, we didn't care. At a quiet dinner, just the two of us, Julian told me about Marcus, how he'd loved him but couldn't trust him, how he'd built walls to protect himself. You're different, he said, his eyes soft. You make me want to be better. What do you do when someone finally lets you in? How do you love when you're both learning how? I kissed him, and for the first time, it felt like a promise we could keep. The aftermath of the scandal wasn't easy. Julian's firm demoted him, a slap on the wrist for the bad press. But he took it in stride. I've got better things to fight for now, he told me, his smile genuine. We moved slower, learning each other without the contract hanging over us. He started coming to my studio, not as a prop, but as a partner, asking about my art, even trying to paint badly. But it made me laugh. What does it mean to build something real? How do you trust when you've both been burned? We were figuring it out, one messy, beautiful step at a time. Marcus tried one last time, showing up at my studio with an apology I didn't want. I was wrong, he said. But he'll hurt you. He always does. I looked at him, the man who'd almost broken us, and felt nothing but pity. He's not who you think he is anymore, I said. Neither am I. Marcus left, and I knew it was the last we'd see of him. Julian and I spent a weekend in Maine, away from the city's noise. We walked along the coast, the wind sharp, his hand warm in mine. I was scared, he admitted, staring at the waves. Of this. Of you. But I'm not anymore. I kissed him, the salt on his lips mixing with the sea air, and I knew we'd made it through the worst. What do you do when you've found something worth keeping? How do you hold on without fear? I didn't have all the answers, but I had Julian, and that was enough. Back in New York, my art started selling. A gallery picked up my work, and Julian was there at the opening, prouder than I'd ever seen him. You did this, he said, pointing to my paintings. Not me, not the contract you. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he'd changed me too, but I just pulled him close, letting the crowd fade away. What does it mean to love someone who sees you? How do you keep growing when you've already found home? I was still learning, but with Julian by my side, I wasn't afraid anymore. 6 months later, we weren't pretending anymore. Julian left Pierce and Thorne, starting his own firm focused on pro bono work for marginalized communities. I painted full-time, my work gaining traction. But the real victory was us two people who'd stumbled into a lie and found something true. We moved in together, a small apartment in Brooklyn, where my sketches covered the walls and his law books cluttered the shelves. What does it mean to build a life together? How do you hold on to love when the world keeps testing it? We learned through late-night talks, quiet mornings, and every kiss that felt like a promise kept. One night, we sat on our tiny balcony, the city humming below. Julian pulled me close, his voice soft. I thought I'd lose you, he said, when it all fell apart. I shook my head, tracing the lines of his face. You couldn't. Not now. We kissed, and it wasn't about the past or the act, it was about us. Here. Now. The world wasn't perfect. There were still whispers, doubts, People who didn't understand. But we'd faced worse. And we'd come out stronger. My art told our story colors of chaos and calm, love and fear, truth and lies. Julian hung one in his office, a reminder of where we'd started and how far we'd come. What does it mean to love without pretense? How do you keep going when you've already found everything? We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other. And that was the most human, most beautiful truth of all.